This is the third video talking about Chapter 11 on exception handling and input-output. So we're going to talk about designing your own exception types. You can design your own exception types, subclasses of exception or runtime exception. So we could define a insufficient funds exception for a banking example when the amount to withdraw exceeds the current balance. So we throw a new insufficient funds exception. We should make it an unchecked exception because the programmer could have avoided it by calling getBalance first instead of legal element. Support two constructors for the class, a constructor with no arguments and a constructor with a message. To place the messages, send it to the superclass. When the exception is caught, its message string can be retrieved using the getMessage method of the throwable class. The try finally statement. If cleanup other than just closing is required, you have to reset something or other, you can use a finally block. Finally always executes. If no exception occurs, finally block executes after the try block. If exception occurs, finally block is executed after the exception is propagated. Finally rarely is required. Most Java library classes implement auto-closable interfaces. So an application, handling input error. Program asks the user for the name of a file. File expected to contain data values. First line of the file contains total number of values. Remaining line contains the data. Here's a typical input file. What could go wrong? The file might not exist. The file might have data in the wrong formats. Who can detect the faults? Scanner constructor will throw an exception when the file doesn't exist. The processing methods need to throw an exception if they find the data in error. So what exceptions do we throw? File not found exception can be thrown by scanner. Bad data exception, a custom checked exception class for product dating format. Who can remedy the faults? Only the main method can interact with the user, so it should catch exceptions and print error messages. Give a user a chance to enter a correct file name. So here's the stub for it. Anyway, the readFile class is how we can construct a scanner object. It completely unconcerned with any exceptions. If there's a problem with the input file, it simply passes the exception to the caller. Very simple, and it bubbles it right up. Yeah, so we've designed this read data method. It reads the number of values, constructs an array, calls the read value for each data value, get the number of items. It checks for two potential errors. The file might not start with an integer, and it may not have enough data in it. It makes no attempt to catch it, just lets the exceptions bubble up. Read value does the same thing, doesn't catch it. So data analyzer.main calls datasetReader.readFile. ReadFile calls readData. Data calls readValue. It doesn't find the value, throws a bad data exception. ReadValue has no handler. ReadData has no handler. ReadFile has no handler. So dataanalyzer.main has a handler, and it grabs it and prints the message. Here's the definition of our bad data exception. And that covers Chapter 11 on exception handling.